Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us and hearing our conversation today. I'm with one of our occupational therapy doctorate students who's going to share a little bit about her occupational injustice project from one of her classes. So welcome, Maddie. Thank you for coming.
Thank
Um,
you.
why don't you introduce yourself, tell listeners a little bit about you, when are you gonna graduate, and maybe what kind of practice area do you think you would like to practice in when you're done?
Okay. My name is Maddy Pertle. I'm in my third semester of the OTD program here at Concordia. A little bit about me. I played soccer here all 4 years. I just stopped playing soccer. And yeah, that's the most interesting thing about me right now. I am most interested in pediatrics. I have a very strong passion for kids and just being around them and giving them hugs and all of that. And I'm very, very interested in autism spectrum disorder. That's something that I really want to get to know more about. So that is what my capstone is going to be about for my doctorate. I'm at a school with 100% of the kids have autism spectrum disorder. And I am advocating for the implementation of a sensory room in their school. So
Awesome.
that'll be really cool. And yeah, I'll graduate in May of 2026. So yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Okay. So, in the third semester, you take a community advocacy and leadership class. And as part of that course, you've identified and been exploring an occupational injustice from current events. Tell us what you've been focusing on and what made you interested in that topic.
Yeah. Okay, so my occupational injustice, it was mainly focused on my capstone because I wanted to focus a lot on children with disabilities and how what impacts their school and education participation. So I did a little bit of research and I found an injustice that a lot of children with disabilities are not granted a full school day. Um,
Hmm.
and there's many different reasonings for this. This can be because they've had an outburst in class and they're taken out of class because of this outburst. This can be based upon them wanting to have a shortened school day. There's a lot of different reasonings, but mine is mainly focused on them not being granted that because of the school, not because of them choosing to be taken out of school halfway through the day or between classes or such. Um, so basically, I chose this obviously because I wanted to see what the how this can affect children with disabilities because going to a public school growing up, I noticed that I never had classes with children with disabilities. I never, because they were taken out of class or they had their own schedule where they weren't granted a full school day. So this is really an interesting thing that I think is not talked about much. So it was really interesting to research.
Yeah. And so by when you say not have a full school day, are you talking about actual hours in the building are less than general education students, or are you talking about like time spent in a general education classroom?
Yeah, so the original story that I found, talked about a girl who was in her classroom and she had an outburst and she was taken out of the general education classroom. So then more of my research is focused on not necessarily like being in the school, but just being in the environment of a general education with other students and having that social interaction and all of that. So,
Okay. Yeah, so kind of what in therapy when that happens, we call it like a pull-out model.
mhm.
And so, okay, so you're looking at really like on an IEP, it might be like the percentage of time spent with general education peers versus
hmm
special education peers or just out of the classroom with
Yeah.
teachers.
hmm
Okay. Um, so why is this relevant to OT today, and what makes it an injustice?
Yeah, so as OTs, we have this kind of mindset that obviously we have holistic care and we focus a lot on our clients' lives outside of therapy. And we focus a lot on their occupations, their daily life occupations, and a huge one for kids is their educational participation, because that can have such an impact on their future. So this is very relevant to OT because we, I mean, especially with peds OTs, we focus a lot on their educational participation because it is such a big occupation once again.
Yeah.
And the research that I found has shown that the outcomes of children with disabilities not being able to spend the same amount of time with their peers has many negative impacts on their social interaction skills, which is kind of, you can assume that because they don't get the social interaction with the general education students. And then it also has behavioral outcomes. It can increase their anxiety. It can have negative outcomes on their emotional status, their emotional regulation, and that altogether can negatively impact their participation in their occupation of school. And then this can also further lead to negative outcomes on their daily occupations at home. So it's kind of just like a ripple effect. So this is definitely something that OTs should focus on with kids with disabilities, especially just because we want our overall goals in therapy is we want them to have a better quality of life. We want them to be participating in these occupations that are so meaningful to them. So, and this is also why it's an injustice because there's a law in action, the IDEA,
Mhm.
which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And this grants all individuals with disabilities the ability to participate in school just like everyone else. So when they're not granted that full school day, they're not actually getting that full educational participation that they're granted from this law. So this is what my research is based on, is just that it should be aligning with the laws that we have in action, and these kids should be able to be in the classroom. There should be modifications, there should be things that support their educational participation rather than taking them out and just like, taking them away from their classmates just because they're different. So,
Sure. So, did you find through your research that there are certain populations that are impacted more than others, either certain disability types or certain um, different subgroups within a
yeah.
variety of demographic categories?
I honestly, the reason why I found this was just by searching like injustices with children with disabilities. And this is a story that came up, and I was a little bit apprehensive because there's not much research on it. There is research on a full school day and how that impacts children with disabilities and their educational participation and things that I've talked about, but there's not much about where exactly this happens. And I didn't find anything about specific disabilities or specific areas that are impacted most. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is it's a tricky question. It's a tricky issue. I was a school-based therapist before I moved into academia, and the conversation around what is least restrictive environment, which is the part of IDEA that talks about students' location and what they have a right to, really varies so much. I mean, the way that places define LRE can vary a lot, and I think that the large majority of students, LRE is inclusion with their gen ed peers.
Mhm.
Um, there also, I think, are positive and good reasons also to provide at times
Yeah.
education or therapy outside of a general education setting as well. And so I think the um, I don't know. I think my biggest takeaway about LRE and all the time that I practice was that it really has to be individualized
Hmm.
and, maximize the amount of time that an individual can be with their same age peers. But that isn't always 100% of the
Hmm.
time, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. And
Yeah.
that was my experience. And I know that some definitely feel different than that, that it should
Mhm.
be 100% inclusion 100% of the time. I think there's a middle ground there. What do you think?
I agree with you. So when I was originally researching this, I noticed that it's an injustice, but then I actually visited my capstone site and I kind of saw what it's like. They're an 100% um autism
Special
school. So
education.
that's
Yeah.
completely different than the general education, but I kind of got to see just with children with autism, but I got to see how severe it can be in the educational environment and also how little and how you can barely even notice, you know? So
Yep.
after that, I kind of sat back and was like, well, I know that there's definitely some kids who don't want to be in the general education environment for the whole day and they need to be taken out. And that's what my project is on, is being taken out as a proactive measure rather than reactive, but just
Hmm.
to get that sensory regulation and before they are able to get back into the classroom. So this was
Sure.
kind of challenging my capstone because I'm focusing on taking them out of the classroom and giving them that time to regulate and going back in. So that's why originally I was kind of apprehensive, but I thought it was still super interesting because there are still people who want that 100% or even just
Yes.
more time in the general education. So I agree that it is very individualized. So it's definitely something to still keep in mind because I've done this research and I understand more. But I do see both sides of some kids might not want that and some kids might really, really, really want that.
Yeah.
So,
And I think for some kids, even though they want it, it might not be the best for them to access their
yeah.
education at times. But I love that you picked this topic because I do think there are also a large number of kids who are probably pulled out of the classroom way more than they need to be. And
Hmm.
so I think it's such a relevant question for OTs as a part of a school-based team to really think about what does that mean and how does that impact our decisions about our service delivery? Right?
Hmm.
Are we missing opportunities to support a child in their general education environment to help promote that independence or promote those social participation goals and the educational engagement? Um, so really evaluating for every single child and the goals that we're working on. Can we do
Hmm.
this in the gen ed classroom or in the gen ed lunchroom or an art class or recess? Can
Hmm.
we work this in a way that doesn't take the child out of that natural environment? I think
Yeah.
it is so important to think about that.
Hmm.
Awesome. So if there are OTs listening right now, who want to think more about this or take action on this, what is something they can do?
I think really, like we've been talking about, it's so individualized, but I do think that there are some resources or stories that you can read just to get more of a bigger picture of how some students might feel. Because I know me personally, I always thought the other way of, oh, kids want to be taken out of class because they want to get that regulation like we were talking about. Like they want to have a break from the general education environment because it can be too much. But I never really thought about the other side of them actually wanting that general education and the impact that it can have on them. So, I would just recommend looking it up on Google because obviously there's not much research on it. It's not a huge issue that's talked about. But for me personally, I know that reading the stories, because there's quite a bit of stories on just like articles or there's this one mom that I can give you the link to put in
Yeah,
the
we can
video
link it in the
description.
show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what really based my whole project was that
Mhm.
story. Because I never thought about the other side. So I think just reading that and kind of understanding the other point of view can just open other OT's eyes to see that it really does have to be individualized care in the school setting because it can vary so much.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the advocacy process as a student.
Yeah.
So, how was this process for you? And you can kind of think about throughout the program or this specific class. Have you had any experience with community advocacy prior to this? And how was the project for you? How was
Yeah.
this kind of process?
So I honestly had not really had much experience with advocating. I feel like I am a very vocal person and I love talking to people, but I kind of find it hard sometimes to make people think differently than they already do. And that's a skill that I want to be better at because I know that advocating is something that we need. So this whole process made me realize how easy it is to advocate and how just putting your foot forward and doing it is such a great process because with this social media campaign, I was originally going to post it on like a close friend story and not put it to my whole public because I was nervous of how people would react and
Yeah.
just, because this is an issue that obviously a lot of people don't talk about, but a lot of people know about children with disabilities, and a lot of people have this thought or this thought. So I was a little bit nervous, but then I was like, nope, I'm gonna post it on my public story. I'm gonna see what people say because I know that it's an issue that I want people to know more about. Because
Yeah.
even me, as a person who is so passionate about this and knows so much. I had no idea that this was a thought that people had. So after posting the whole campaign and basically explaining my whole advocacy process on my Instagram, I got so many responses of people saying like, thank you so much for talking about this. And even I can read a response for
Yeah.
you because this was just like, there's just to set the scene, my brother is someone who he knows about disabilities, but he's never really like gone into it. And he said one of his responses to one of my posts was how little I think about inclusion when it's something people worry about so often. Like things
Mhm.
like that, where
Yep.
obviously people who are not affected by this personally have no idea that people who are affected by this every single day think about it every single day.
Yeah.
And just like having that type of response and opening people's eyes to issues that I'm so passionate about advocating for was like, it was just such a great experience for me. And I would definitely, definitely do it again. I'm actually thinking about maybe posting it because I don't know if you know on Instagram, you can do like highlights of your story. Um,
Okay.
so I might put my whole campaign like in a highlight so people can go back to it and
Yeah.
relook at it because I think that's just because this is just an easy way of advocating and that's just
Yeah.
one thing that you can do. So I just really, really like this experience. I got so many responses that I never like people that I hadn't heard from since middle school or high school were commenting
I
and saying
love that.
like, thank you so much for opening my eyes. Like I had no idea. Like this made me want to do something. So that was
Yeah.
really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I
Mhm.
think so often social media can get a bad rap, and certainly
Mhm.
there are some hard things about social media
Yeah.
and some negative things. But I think it also can be a platform. That's where so many people spend so much time of the day these days. And
Hmm.
so I think, to put positive things and increase awareness and really think about what you're putting out there on your social media can make a positive impact too,
Hmm.
for sure. So, what was the most challenging part of the project?
Um, I think the most challenging part was just kind of deciding how I wanted to word things and how I wanted to post and how much I wanted to post. I did a lot of research on just how to get more engagement on Instagram or on social media platforms because
Mhm.
I know like you said, a lot of people spend time on social media nowadays,
Yeah.
but also our attention span is getting shorter. So if I post
Yes.
something that has, a 5 minute long video or I have something with a bunch of text on it, like that's obviously not something that people will pay attention to.
Yeah.
So it took me a while to kind of get that template and like how many reactive things do I want on it? Do I want a video? Do I want how much text do I want on each slide? Things like that. That was probably the most challenging part just because I did want to make a difference and I did want engagement. I wanted to open people's eyes like I did. So that took me a little while, but once I realized that people love voting and they love saying their thoughts and they love doing all of that, I did a vote every single day on my social media and I ended up getting like 150 votes per day. So it
Awesome.
it definitely got out there. So that was
Yeah.
something that was my biggest challenge probably, but
It's interesting to think about the amount of intentionality that that takes when you're trying to focus and make an impact. Where if you think about how many people are posting on social media,
yep.
just like all the time, and
Mhm.
maybe not that intentional, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so yeah, that's really interesting.
Hmm.
All right. So how has going through this influenced maybe your thoughts on your own practice moving forward?
Yeah. I think, geez, I keep hitting my desk. I think the biggest part for me is obviously I know as an OT, I need to have holistic care. I need to individualize my how I treat my clients, especially pediatric clients, but any clients in general. Everyone is
Mhm.
so individual and their thoughts, their feelings, everything is so different. But this really opened my eyes to realize that yes, children with disabilities are one population, but every child is so different and they want one person may want one thing and one person wants a completely different thing. So even with my capstone project, when I'm implementing this sensory room, I have to keep in mind that although every child has autism, the autism spectrum is so broad, and every
Yes.
kid is going to need a different type of sensory regulation tool. So I need to keep in mind like how much my equipment can vary and how just everything has to be individualized and everything it
Yeah.
can't all be the same thing. It can't be the stereotypical thing to choose, like a swing in the sensory room. Like, yes, that's stereotypical, and some kids need it, some kids don't. Like it's just that individualized care, and especially when I'm treating kids in the future too, just realizing that I need to get to know them as a person and get to know what they want and how they feel before making decisions.
Yeah, I think that's so important, right? Keeping that patient-centered care at the heart
Mhm.
of really what we're doing, and combining, the occupation and the patient. That's what makes us us. That's what makes
Mhm.
OTs so unique and also so valuable because
Mhm.
not everybody is approaching cases the same way that we do. I would venture to say that really no one is, right? We are
Yeah,
really the
yeah.
that is looking at patients in that occupation-based way and really thinking about that individualness. So that's really
Hmm.
exciting.
Hmm.
Okay, so as we wrap up, I have two questions I ask everybody who comes on the podcast. So
Okay.
first, what area of life or practice do you think OTs should have a bigger role in?
Ooh, this is a good question. Um, hmm. OTs have a bigger role in. I feel like OTs have a role in every area of life. Um, hmm. I think one, after talking to all my classmates and seeing their social media campaigns and just, I think mental health is a big thing that
Yeah.
OTs should focus more on because yeah, we do focus a lot on mental health and we focus on occupations and daily life things, which also are aligned with mental health. But I think we oftentimes think that that's up to like a psychologist or a counselor, someone who is more educated in mental health, which yes, you can use interprofessional care, but
Mhm.
I think OTs could be really great in the mental health settings too. So,
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of going back to our roots. That's where we started. And
mhm.
certainly there is a movement getting back to those roots and doing more mental health care, but we're not where we want to be or where we should
Yeah.
be for sure. I agree.
Hmm.
Okay, and then last question, what current occupation brings you joy?
Ooh, there's a lot. I would
Good.
say just spending time with people who make me happy. I think that's something because I'm a very big people person and I love being around people who make me smile, and especially my family and my friends and my roommates. So one of my main occupations is just like social interaction and having fun with my friends and my family. So that's probably my number one occupation that makes me happy.
I love that.
Hmm.
Well, thank you so much for spending time in your finals week with me. I appreciate it. I know it can be hard to slot some time in just for something like this, but I think this topic is really important to share, and I think it's great that you're kind of tackling it. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.